Hey guys, tonight we travel deep into a forested valley in 14th century Burma, where the air smells like damp teakwood and distant incense. You're standing just outside a bamboo monastery as twilight melts into indigo, and the only sounds are crickets, the soft crunch of bare feet on gravel, and the creak of ancient doors pulled slowly shut. You tug your thin shawl tighter. It's not cold, just quiet in a way that gets into your bones. The monks begin to emerge, their shaved heads gleaming in the last light, moving with the kind of stillness that makes even the wind seem like it's intruding. This isn't a place for casual drop-ins. You're here to witness what almost no outsider gets to see, the nightly devotions and bizarre bedtime rules of 14th century Theravada monks. But a word of caution, by the end of tonight, you might start questioning your own nighttime habits, or sanity, or both. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the monks as they move through a wooden gate carved with protective spells. Inside, the compound is lit by hanging lanterns filled with yellow oil, casting trembling shadows over walls blackened by age and prayer smoke. The air is thick with incense, sandalwood and dried lotus, and something bitter you can't quite name. The novices go first, their heads low, robes a little uneven. They aren't allowed to speak after sundown, not even to ask for a second mat if the floor is damp. One sneezes and earns a sideways glance from an older monk. You swear you can feel that glance from across the courtyard. A bell chimes, not a melodic one. This is a deep, rattling bowl struck with a wooden mallet, meant to resonate through your ribcage. You flinch. Everyone else bows. Now the routines begin. Rituals, they'd say, but it feels like something stranger. You're guided to a corner to sit, instructed not to speak, cough, or, if possible, breathe too loudly. Someone hands you a piece of palm leaf parchment. There's a rule written on it. Do not cross your feet after the fifth bell. No explanation, just that. One historical truth about these monasteries: they ran on rules, hundreds of them, many designed not just for moral order, but to trip up your ego. You think of them as spiritual bug zappers. The moment pride or laziness got close, zap, it burned itself out on a rule that made no sense to the modern mind. One such rule, you'll learn later, banned the sound of teeth grinding at night, not because it disturbed others, but because it stirred past lives of animalhood. That's right. Gnashing your molars might invite your inner jackal back into the world. The monks light a final circle of lanterns, and everything slows. Your breath, your blinking, the way your thoughts try to make sense of all this. You're not sure whether you're being initiated into enlightenment or into a very solemn form of sleep paralysis. And yet, despite all the strictness, there's beauty here. One old monk, nearly blind, chants in Pali as he circles the prayer hall. His voice doesn't waver. The rhythm is so even you feel your pulse sinking to it. His chant speaks of impermanence, dust, and the wind that carries the names of the dead. A side detail you almost miss: there's a cat. Yes, a monastery cat, black as ink and utterly fearless. It sits by the chanting monk and yawns dramatically, showing more teeth than most demons. One novice twitches as if suppressing a laugh, which, if the stories are true, could cost him tomorrow's rice. Some historians still debate whether these nighttime rituals were truly about devotion or social discipline. Were the rules meant to shape inner peace or just train obedience? Did monks kneel out of reverence or fear of punishment? You start to wonder yourself as your knees go numb. The bell rings again. The blind monk stops chanting, and the silence returns like a held breath. You glance up at the wooden ceiling beams, wondering what dreams they've soaked in over the centuries. Then, without a word, everyone begins moving toward their sleeping mats. The rules only grow stranger from here. The sleeping area is bare, save for thin straw mats and a few low wooden shelves. You watch as each monk carefully unwraps his robe, not to undress, but to refold it in an exacting sequence that looks more like origami than laundry. The novices fumble, and you sense tension in the air, like the room itself disapproves. You've read about modern fashion faux pas, like wearing white to someone else's wedding or socks with sandals. But here, in this 14th century Burmese monastery, the stakes are oddly metaphysical. Fold a robe the wrong way, and it's not just impolite, it might disrupt the karmic field of the entire room. One historical rule from this monastery's Patimokkha scrolls states, "The edge of the robe must not point north after sundown." Why? No one says. Maybe it offends a guardian spirit, or maybe it just means the laundry ghosts are picky about feng shui. You try not to laugh, because laughing in a robe is technically a breach of decorum. The color of the robes matters too. Most wear a kind of muted saffron, but you notice one monk in deep maroon. Turns out, his dye comes from a different tree bark, reserved only for those who've meditated in the jungle for over 100 days. That's right, robe color here is basically a wearable resume. Some novices wear faded ochre, which can only be used in dry season. Monsoon robes must be slightly darker to blend with the color of wet earth, says a monk who's clearly memorized every line of this strange textile commandment book. There's a footnote in your mind. Note to self, don't wear bright orange in July. Another detail you can't ignore, how the robe is wrapped. You watch one monk undo and redo his wrap 4 times just to get the layers symmetrical. There's no mirror, he just senses it, like a robe Jedi. His fingers twitch slightly as he tucks the final corner. It must be perfect. If even a strip hangs loose, it's said the robe loses its merit, like a phone that won't hold charge unless it's plugged in just so. The older monks don't speak, but you feel their eyes on you. You're trying, clumsily, to wrap a borrowed robe over your clothes, and it's not going well. One side sags like melted tofu. Another wraps too tight, threatening to cut off circulation to your left lung. You remember something from earlier, a whispered warning not to let the robe cover your feet during prayer. Apparently, that's considered a gesture of arrogance, like crossing your legs on a royal train. And yes, they had rules for those too. Oh, and here's a weird one. In one record, there's a ban on wearing robes dyed with blossoms that sing. No one has quite figured out what that means. Were these literal singing flowers? Or did someone mistake a bee bush for a barbershop quartet? The historians still argue, and frankly, who can blame them? Another rule, robes must never be folded in the same room where one eats. That's not about cleanliness, it's about attachment. If you see your robe while you eat, you might start to think of it as yours, and that leads to desire, which leads to suffering, which leads to, well, another lecture from the abbot. And here's where things get almost poetic. There's a passage in the monastery's rulebook that describes the robe as the second skin of a life already shed. You look down at the cloth in your lap and realize this isn't just clothing. It's a statement, a shield, maybe even a spell. The monks begin to line up, preparing for their evening meditation. Their robes flow almost soundlessly, save for the faint rustle of fabric. You catch the faintest smell of turmeric and smoke, sandalwood again, maybe, with an undercurrent of age and wear. One monk glides past you. His robe has patches, meticulously hand-stitched squares, each representing a vow kept or trial endured. It's the most beautiful thing you've seen all night. A lived-in holiness, threaded resilience. If this were a fashion show, it would close the runway. You sit back on your mat, your own robe now hanging awkwardly like a deflated tent. But somehow, that's okay. No one scolds you. Maybe they see your effort. Or maybe they know that in this place, it's not about how you look, but how still you're willing to become. And as the final bell tolls and everyone lowers themselves into seated prayer, you understand that the robe isn't just about covering the body. It's about undressing the self. You sit with your knees folded, hands gently resting in your lap. The hall is dim now, lit only by flickering oil lamps that throw long, trembling shadows across the floor. The bell has stopped ringing, and a deep hush falls over the room. So deep, you can hear your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. But you're not allowed to focus on that. No, that would count as internal distraction. And yes, that's actually a listed offense. The monk in front of you coughs once, and 3 heads turn. Not because it's disruptive, coughs happen, but because he didn't cover his mouth with the correct hand. You silently note it. Left hand for gestures, right hand for hygiene. A rule you didn't know existed until it was broken. Tonight's meditation isn't freeform. It's a specific sequence called Karuna Bhavana, the cultivation of compassion. That sounds sweet, right? Except the rulebook outlines the entire emotional spectrum you're allowed to feel, and in what order. Feel too much sadness at the wrong moment? That's a misstep. Let joy creep in too early? Start over. You close your eyes and try to empty your mind, but immediately think of mangoes, the dried ones they gave you earlier at the temple gate. Forbidden during meditation, of course. You sigh, and one of the novices to your left lets out a breath too, maybe in empathy or in judgment. Hard to tell in the dark. Here's a peculiar thing from the 14th century scrolls. Monks were encouraged to imagine specific metaphors during meditation. For compassion, it had to be like a mother cow lowing for her calf in the rain. If you imagine a goat, or heaven forbid, a human mother, the merit doesn't count the same. That's the rule. Moo or bust. One record describes a novice who failed to imagine the cow and was made to kneel in the courtyard for 3 hours, repeating, "I will not think of ducks." The monks took metaphor seriously, apparently. Historians have argued whether this was symbolic or just a really committed prank. The jury's still out. The hall is filled with the soft murmur of synchronized breath. You try to focus again, this time picturing the prescribed image: a calf, a cow, the sound of gentle rain. It's oddly comforting. You feel your spine lengthen, your body soften. Then a beetle lands on your arm. You freeze. Swatting is not allowed. Movement is discouraged. Causing harm to sentient beings? Major infraction. So you sit, feeling the insect crawl slowly toward your elbow, each leg a needle of pure sensation. This is the true test, you realize. Not stillness, but surrender. Eventually, the beetle wanders off, maybe bored. You resist the urge to cheer. You're learning. The meditation ends not with a bell, but with a whispered chant that rolls through the hall like fog. May all beings be free from suffering. The words are ancient, and yet oddly modern. You feel something uncoil inside you, a tightness you didn't know was there. Then comes the next rule, bowing. You must bow, but not too low. Too shallow, and it's pride. Too deep, and it's performative. There's a sweet spot, apparently. One monk has a string tied between his thumb and chin to measure the angle each night. You're not sure if that's devotion or a DIY neck brace. You bow anyway, trusting instinct. Your forehead grazes the mat and you breathe in the faint scent of dust and old incense. Here's another strange instruction from the monk's manual. After meditation, you're supposed to sit completely still for exactly 3 breaths, as a way to offer your silence to the stars. Beautiful, right? But no one can agree on what it means. One historian says it's a relic of animistic sky worship. Another says it's just poetic bookkeeping, something nice to write in margins. But you do it anyway. You sit still. You breathe once, twice, 3 times. And somehow you feel a little taller, a little quieter. a little less like someone from the 21st century wearing a borrowed robe in a strange land, and a little more like a monk who's been here all along. The floor creaks softly beneath you as you rise. No words are exchanged. Speech is prohibited until the morning bell. You've made it through evening devotion, but now comes something even more peculiar: the inspection walk. Yes, you're inspected before bed. Not by a stern master with a cane. No, it's subtler than that. One of the senior monks glides between the rows of sleeping mats like a librarian, silently checking for breaches of protocol. You're not sure what he's looking for, but you tuck your blanket tighter around your ankles, just in case. Your assigned mat is made of tightly woven palm fiber, so rough it exfoliates your entire back just by lying down. The rulebook specifies one layer of bedding only. No pillows unless granted by a superior, and even then it must be filled with raw cotton or kapok, not tempting materials. You wonder what counts of tempting: goose feathers? Marshmallows? As you lower yourself down, you remember the proper sleep posture, lying on your right side like the Buddha did during his final hours. Your left hand rests gently on your thigh, your right cradles your cheek. It's strangely intimate for a religious rule, but that's the thing about this monastery. It blurs the line between ritual and routine. Some historians believe this posture wasn't just symbolic. It was a way to discourage certain unmonastic thoughts at night. After all, you're more likely to drift into harmless dreams of rice fields and rain when your limbs are folded neatly, your breathing measured. Others argue it's just a practical sleeping position that keeps the heart unobstructed. Either way, you do your best to mimic the statue you saw in the temple earlier, even though your elbow is already going numb. Here's a curious little side note from the original manuscripts. Monks in 14th century Burma were required to whisper a final vow before sleep, something like, "I shall wake with clarity and without regret." That sounds poetic until you realize it's also a psychological booby trap. If you don't wake with clarity, guess who's cleaning the temple floor with a toothbrush? The inspection monk pauses near your mat. You resist the urge to blink. He adjusts a hanging lantern slightly to your right and moves on. Crisis averted. A sudden breeze sneaks through the slatted window, rustling the cloth dividers that separate the novices' sleeping quarters. You hear someone's stomach growl, followed by an apologetic cough. Mealtimes are strict. You ate last at noon, and the next meal won't be until sunrise. No snacks, no chewing gum, not even a sleepy cup of tea. Just you, your thoughts, and the sound of crickets outside. And now you remember the strangest bedtime rule of all. Monks were instructed to count their thoughts backwards before sleep. Yes, backwards. You start at 100 and work your way down, identifying each mental distraction and giving it a name. Worry about tomorrow. That mango craving again. Wondering if that beetle has a family. The idea was to detach from each one, naming it like a firefly in the night. Some scholars suggest this practice was a proto-form of mindfulness meditation. Others say it was more like spiritual accounting, a mental checklist to prove your readiness for tomorrow's vows. But it's hard not to laugh, just a little, when you reach thought number 83 and it's literally, "Why am I still counting?" Still, you play along. You count, you breathe. You notice the rhythm of your own heart as it slows, gently syncing with the chirping of distant frogs. You begin to understand something here. This rulebook isn't just a set of demands. It's a ritualized lullaby, each line a soft pressure guiding you toward stillness. A novice to your left lets out a tiny snore and is immediately nudged, too loud. You file that away under Avoid during personal sleep review. The final part of tonight's rules, you must visualize a golden stupa before your mind drifts. Not just any stupa, the Mahabodhi, precisely, complete with its 4 lotus-shaped gates and spire of stone umbrellas. You try. You imagine the ancient stupa rising in moonlight. You picture the bells on its tiers swaying in the wind. It works for a while. Then your mind betrays you with a vision of a giant mango balancing on top instead of a spire. You stifle a laugh, swallowing it down into your chest. Eventually, the world quiets. The hall becomes a sea of steady breath. You're still lying on your side, arms numb, thoughts trailing behind you like mist. And somewhere in that haze, a final memory drifts in, the rule you read earlier. At some vague hour before dawn, when the sky is still dark but no longer black, you're stirred by a hollow clang. It echoes like a ripple through the sleeping hall. And just like that, the day begins. No snooze button, no warm covers, just the bell and your duty. You rise without speaking. Morning silence is sacred. Even the floorboards seem to understand, creaking with extra reverence under bare feet. Outside, the wind brushes against the palm fronds like someone whispering secrets you're not yet ready to hear. You head straight to the cleansing area, a humble courtyard with basins and cold clay urns lined up like soldiers. The rules are specific. Splash water from left to right 3 times. No more, no less. You rinse your mouth, your face, your hands, and your feet. Yes, feet, because purity apparently starts from the bottom up. A 14th century note, faint and almost apologetic, mentions that some monks complained about cold water during monsoon months. The reply, scrawled in a different hand, attachment to warmth is attachment to illusion. Harsh. As you finish drying off with your thin, scratchy towel, definitely not bamboo blend, you remember today is your turn on alms duty. Alms duty means walking barefoot through the nearby village, holding your begging bowl out with both hands like a solemn statue. You don't ask, you don't thank, you simply receive. It's not charity, it's a ritual exchange. They offer food, you offer merit. The rulebook says your expression must remain unwaveringly neutral, which is tough when someone drops hot, sticky rice onto your fingers and you're trying not to flinch. There's a lot of academic debate about this practice. Was it a genuine act of spiritual interdependence, a reminder of impermanence, or just a logistical solution to feeding 100 bald men with no income? The answer is yes. You pass a sleepy child carrying a basket of bananas twice his size. He stares at you. You nod. He drops in a tiny wedge of coconut and a wildflower. You accept it like gold, because it is. Back at the monastery, breakfast isn't rushed, but it isn't exactly cheerful either. Meals are silent. You sit in rows, facing the same direction, with your rice and bits of fruit laid out like sacred offerings. You chew slowly, counting each bite. Not metaphorically, actually counting. It's in the rulebook, 32 chews per mouthful. Why? Because chewing builds patience. Or maybe because it discourages you from inhaling your rice like a starved goat. A side note in the margins of one scroll jokes, "He who chews fast will live short." Probably not scientific, but very on brand. As the meal ends, you clean your own dish with a palm leaf and water. No soap. Soap is for people with attachments. Then you bow toward the elders, still wordless, and head toward the main hall. But on the way, a secret detour, because today's the day of the confession ritual. Ah yes, you forgot about this one, didn't you? Twice a month, every monk must sit in a circle and recite the Patimokkha, the list of 227 rules that govern monkhood. If you've broken one, you confess. Not necessarily to another person, but aloud, in the presence of the Sangha. No penalty, no lecture, just honest admission and a mental vow to do better. The ritual takes hours, literally. It's not even in Burmese, it's in Pali, a language you've studied but don't really feel. You chant until your tongue is dry and your legs are numb. Interestingly, historians have found some versions of this ritual that include localized additions, like do not take mangoes from the shrine garden, or refrain from arguing about astrology near the novices. Rules evolve, but guilt, it seems, is eternal. You sit there, chanting, half dreaming of cool water and foot massages, when your mind drifts, just a bit. You remember the confession of an old monk last month. He'd spoken with tears in his eyes, admitting that he'd swatted a mosquito in frustration. The whole room went silent. It was as if he'd confessed to arson. But after the chanting came the silence, the sacred pause, the unspoken agreement that, despite our flaws, we return again to the path. By now, your legs are trembling. You risk shifting slightly, and the monk next to you gives a side glance. Not enough to break the ritual, but enough to say, careful. As the final syllables of the Patimokkha trail off, by the time the sun is fully awake and showing off with its golden shimmer on the thatched rooftops, you're out in the monastery garden. Though garden might be a generous word. It's more like a sun-baked field where things occasionally agree to grow. You grab a spade, its handle smooth from decades of calloused hands, and begin digging as if your enlightenment depends on it. Because apparently, it kind of does. Labor is not a punishment here. It's a sacred obligation, written into the very bones of the monastic code. Manual work purifies the body and stills the mind. You're not supposed to talk, but your shovel has a lot to say. It squeaks and thuds and resists in just the right ways to make you notice your breath again. One of the rules, hidden several paragraphs deep in the rulebook's garden conduct section, warns against harvesting vegetables that wink at you suggestively. It's likely a metaphor, or maybe 14th century eggplants had a weird sense of humor. Either way, you keep your eyes on the ground. Today's job is weeding, humble, repetitive, meditative. Each tug at a stubborn root reminds you that nothing goes quietly, not even crabgrass. Your fingers get stained with soil, and there's something oddly luxurious about it, like wearing the earth as gloves. A senior monk passes by with a watering pot fashioned from an old gourd. He doesn't speak, but he nods approvingly at your technique. It's the monastery equivalent of winning an Oscar. You pause to stretch your back and spot the irrigation system, a clever network of bamboo troughs that funnel stream water down into the lower garden. Ancient engineering, still effective. Historians suspect this design may have been imported from Indian Ashokan traditions, though some Burmese scholars insist it was developed locally. Cue centuries of scholarly passive aggression. As the sun climbs, your shadow shrinks and the breeze dies. Sweat clings to your skin like an overly affectionate ghost. You keep going. Then it happens. You hear it, the dull thunk of something hard beneath your spade. You dig carefully and pull up a rusted, moss-covered artifact, a bell fragment, probably bronze. One of the elder monks wanders over, takes a look, and murmurs something about the old temple wall, now long gone. Just like that, your morning becomes a chapter in someone's dissertation. Break time comes with no official announcement. It's more of a collective intuition. You find a spot under the frangipani tree, where pink blossoms fall like lazy snow. There's a shared pot of tea waiting, lukewarm, bitter, herbal, exactly what you didn't know you needed. Across from you, a novice scribbles something into a scroll. He's not supposed to be journaling during work periods, but the rule against self-reflective indulgence has always been flexible. The air grows still. Your arms ache, your knees complain, but your thoughts are quieter than they've been in weeks. And then, because this monastery has a flair for the theatrical, a gong sounds. Not the meditation gong, not the meal gong, but the unexpected assembly gong. You groan inwardly. These are rarely brief. You shuffle with the others to the main hall, shoes off, back straight. You sit in lines while an elder monk, voice weathered like a dried chili pepper, announces the topic: revised rules on lantern use. You almost laugh. Apparently, someone left an oil lantern burning in the lavatory, and now a new clause will be added. No flame may be left unattended, even in pursuit of merit. This is Rule 228 if you're counting, which you are because it's required. You glance sideways at another monk who is clearly writing a mental haiku about this moment. You wonder if he'll call it Lantern of Regret. Some scholars argue these constant additions and hyper-specific rules were less about discipline and more about maintaining relevance. As monks encountered new social dilemmas, candles, clocks, curious cats, they adjusted. Others argue it's just what happens when people with lots of time and no hobbies get really into administration. The assembly drifts into a parable about a frog and a watermelon, and you feel your mind melting. It's not boredom exactly, it's more like being gently hypnotized by a very patient tortoise. When it finally ends, you're released, not back to labor, but to drum practice. Yes, because even in a life of silence, someone has to know how to hit things rhythmically for ceremonies. The monastery owns exactly 3 drums, one cracked, one too loud, and one that smells faintly of fish. You pick the middle one and spend half an hour learning a beat that's only used during rain ceremonies, which occur maybe twice a year. But precision matters. As the sun begins to dip, the wind picks up again, rustling the banana leaves like they're applauding. Evening doesn't descend here. It glides in, smooth as lacquer and just as silent. The shadows stretch like monks in slow prostration, and you find yourself back in the courtyard where the air is thick with incense and the last notes of a distant chant. You're barefoot, as always. Your soles know every crack in these stone tiles like an old friend. You're not alone. Other monks are gathering too, and there's a hush among them, more reverent than tired. This isn't just another session of chanting or chores. Tonight is Kamavacha, a word that sounds like a sneeze, but is actually a sacred ritual of confession and discipline. There's a rulebook chapter titled Verbal Acts of Purification. It details how monks must regularly admit faults, not to be shamed, but to stay light, to prevent karmic plaque from building up. So now you sit cross-legged, face the senior monk, and prepare to get emotionally flossed. One by one, voices speak. Quiet, steady, rhythmic. No drama, no juicy details, just the simple admission of mistakes. I stepped on an ant. I was careless with a bowl. I felt pride. You think of your own list. It's not long, but it hums inside you like a lit match. When your turn comes, you speak softly. The air listens harder. And then, like that, it passes. A strange detail slips into your mind, something you read in the margins of the rulebook. Apparently, in one monastery, a monk once confessed to stealing a mango from his own tree. The community debated for hours whether self-theft qualified as a breach of the vow of non-stealing. Consensus? Yes, but only if the mango was picked with craving. Buddhist jurisprudence, folks. After the confessions, the group rises as one. Not in triumph, but in quiet cohesion, like leaves drifting on the same breeze. The ritual ends not with applause, but with silence. A deep, thick silence that fills you more than words ever could. Then the bell sounds again, not sharp, but rounded, like a yawn made of metal. It's time for devotions before bed. This is the last formal act of your day, and possibly the strangest. You follow the group back to the shrine hall, where candles flicker like uncertain thoughts. The scent of sandalwood wraps around you, and the floor is cool beneath your knees. You kneel, not because you're told to, but because your body has learned the choreography of surrender. Tonight's devotion begins with a chant, low, melodic, and in Pali. You don't understand every word, but your tongue does somehow. It rolls over syllables as if they were pebbles smoothed by centuries. It's part mantra, part lullaby, and part linguistic limbo. And then comes the recitation of the 227 precepts. Yes, all of them. It takes over an hour. But you say each one, even if your mind drifts, even if you forget what number you're on. Because that's the point. It's not about perfection, it's about participation. Showing up, saying, "I remember," even when you don't. Midway through, your knee goes numb. By precept 178, you're trying to remember whether you already confessed that desire for a particularly shiny spoon. You did, or at least you think you did. Near the end, your voice joins the others in a rising wave. And for a second, just a blink, you feel completely, weirdly free. Like your skin has been peeled back and the wind is touching your bones in a good way. Some historians argue that these long devotions were less about piety and more about anchoring the body in predictability, turning repetition into a kind of sacred architecture. Others suggest they were developed to lull the mind into submission, like hypnotizing a tiger with a pendulum. You prefer the third theory, that it's a kind of ancient performance art. The rulebook even has aesthetic guidelines: how candles should be trimmed, how robes should fold, how the chant leader should pause just long enough to invoke both reverence and drowsiness. The devotion ends not with a final note, but with a collective exhale. You rise, body creaking like a bamboo gate, and return to your quarters. Your bed is not really a bed. It's a woven mat, a straw pillow, and a folded robe for extra support. But somehow it feels more luxurious than a hotel mattress. There's something to be said for simplicity, something seductive about being unburdened. Before lying down, you perform the last small ritual, brushing your teeth with a twig dipped in ash. It's in the rulebook, of course. Cleanliness is a gateway to mindfulness. You grimace. No one said the gateway would taste like burnt lettuce. Then comes the last moment. You sit on your mat, eyes half closed, palms pressed together. You whisper the Metta Sutta, the loving-kindness chant. The words are like thread, stitching your day closed. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. The night air in the monastery doesn't so much cool as it settles, like an old robe folding itself. You lie on your woven mat, knees bent slightly, hands gently cupped on your chest, not by choice, but because that's how monks are trained to sleep. Straight-backed, alert even in dreams. No tossing, no snoring, and definitely no curling into a fetal position unless you want to reincarnate as a particularly confused shrimp. But sleep doesn't come immediately. You stare up at the thatched ceiling, counting knots instead of sheep. Your thoughts scatter like beads spilled from a prayer bracelet. The rules creep back in. There's one about not sleeping during daytime unless sick. Another about not lying down while a senior monk is standing. Yes, even gravity in the monastery seems to follow a hierarchy. At some point, your mind drifts again to a peculiar entry in the 14th century rulebook, one that's been nagging you all day. It's the regulation that forbids monks from uttering philosophical arguments while urinating. Apparently, there was once an overzealous novice who couldn't resist debating karma and rebirth while relieving himself behind the banana trees. The elders were not amused, and so the rule was born: no bathroom dharma. It's absurd, but also weirdly profound. Even urination has its place. No multitasking, no mental flexing, just present. Even if that presence smells vaguely of fermented jackfruit. There's a rustle outside. You sit up, just enough to see a shadow move across the courtyard. Another monk, perhaps, heading to the latrine. The path is lit by a single oil lamp, flickering like it's remembering something. You lie back down. Dreams arrive slowly here, wrapped in saffron and silence. But they are not yours to claim, not yet. There's still one last thing you must do. At midnight, a small bell chimes. You wake instantly, not from volume, but from training. Your body responds like a trained dog, if that dog had been raised on lentils and introspection. You rise, slip into your robe, and step out into the crisp night. The moon is a bleached coin above you. You move through the dark, past the prayer hall, toward a secluded pavilion behind the Bodhi tree. This is the hour of walking meditation. No one is required to attend. That's the trick. Because every serious monk does. And so do you. Barefoot, you begin walking in slow, measured steps. One foot rises, pauses, touches the earth. The other follows. Each movement is an act of intention, a ceremony of muscles and bones. The rule book has an entire section dedicated to this practice. It insists that even the rhythm of footsteps can influence one's karmic balance. Too fast and you risk haste. Too slow and you invite sloth. Balance is key. One monk reportedly took this so seriously that he had his steps timed with a metronome carved from bamboo. The path winds in a circle. With each lap, your thoughts grow dimmer, like lanterns blown out one by one. And then something shifts. Your awareness turns inward. The sounds of night creatures, the rustling of leaves, even your breath, they all become one soft hum. You're no longer walking through the monastery, you're walking through yourself. Some scholars believe this midnight ritual wasn't always about mindfulness. They say it might have started as a practical strategy to stay warm during frigid nights, movement over meditation. Others suggest it was a secret form of resistance, a way to maintain individuality within the collective rhythm. But you don't need a theory right now. You just walk. When your legs finally grow heavy and your chest fills with sleep like a slow tide, you return to your mat. This time, when you lie down, you don't think. You don't scan for rules. You don't recount transgressions. You simply exhale. And as you slip into sleep, you realize this whole day has been a kind of pilgrimage, not across mountains, but across minutes. Each moment, each action, a tiny shrine. Even the strange rules and silly rituals, they hold the shape of something sacred. Before your consciousness fades, one last memory drifts in. The time a senior monk scolded you for smiling during silent meditation. He said, "Laughter distracts the worms," utterly serious. You never figured out what he meant, but you smiled again anyway. Because sometimes devotion means knowing the rules and laughing at them just enough to stay human.
Dawn begins as a whisper. The darkness doesn't vanish so much as pale, like ink soaking into cloth. You stir before the gong sounds, not because you're eager, but because even your dreams have learned the schedule. Outside, the air is still cool, wet with the breath of trees. You light a small lantern, careful not to disturb the others. Your steps are featherlight as you head to the bathing area, just a bamboo-walled corner behind the main hall, where cold water in ceramic jars waits like a dare. You ladle water over your shoulders. It hits you like judgment, but monks don't flinch. You stand still, every splash an offering. One of the more obscure rules from the 14th century text floats to mind as water trickles down your back. One must not bathe while fantasizing about past lives. You remember reading that with raised eyebrows, because first of all, how would anyone know? And second, does a past life count if you were a tree? Apparently, yes. Your stomach grumbles, but breakfast is still far off. First, there's the alms round. You join the silent procession of monks leaving the monastery, each carrying a blackened bowl hugged close to the chest. The villagers are already waiting, barefoot on the dirt road, holding out parcels of sticky rice, bananas, and the occasional mysterious fried triangle. The rule is strict. You do not speak, smile, or thank. You just accept. And you walk. Some monks close their eyes, trusting the path. Others glance softly downward, but none look the villagers in the eye. It's not pride, it's humility. You're not there to perform, only to receive. One time, a novice accidentally said thank you to an old woman who gave him mango. He was sentenced to an entire week of floor scrubbing without using his knees. So you keep your lips pressed shut. Still, the exchange is profound. They give you food, and you give them merit. At least that's the spiritual theory. In practice, it feels like being in a very quiet, very slow-moving food truck line. You return with your bowl heavy and your thoughts heavier. At breakfast, the rulebook rears its head again. Do not eat unless the rice grains align neatly within the bowl. It's as if the food itself must be part of the meditation. You spend more time arranging your portion than chewing it. And you do not talk. Silence is your condiment. Still, someone breaks the rule. Across from you, a young monk lets out a tiny giggle when his banana slips from his hand and lands on another's foot. The sound is like a match struck in fog. Everyone freezes. A senior monk raises one eyebrow. Just one. The room stiffens. Then, slowly, life resumes. Later, during chores, you sweep the courtyard. Not because it's dirty, it's already spotless, but because sweeping is spiritual. The removal of leaves is the removal of delusion, says the rulebook. A poetic way to say, no one escapes chores. But here's the odd thing. There's a specific instruction about the direction of sweeping. Always inward, never outward. The logic, sweeping inward symbolizes focusing the mind. You tested this once by sweeping outward just to see if you'd feel different. You did. Guilty. Almost like the broom itself was judging you. By midday, the heat returns with vengeance. You retreat to your quarters and sit in the shade, writing verses on palm leaves. Your handwriting is passable. The rulebook says you must not write holy texts with angry hands. You're still trying to figure out what that even looks like. There's a fly buzzing persistently near your ear. You wave it away. The rulebook again offers guidance. Do not kill, nor swat, nor blow upon an insect with the breath of complaint, which leaves you with basically nothing. You try asking the fly nicely. It doesn't work. You wonder how monks dealt with mosquitoes in the rainy season. Then you remember, some wore gauze over their mouths so they wouldn't accidentally inhale bugs and break the vow of non-harm. That's dedication, or desperation, or both. As you lean back and close your eyes, the sun pressing warm fingerprints onto your robe, you begin to realize something. These rules, however strange, however specific, they're not really about control. They're about attention. Every gesture, every glance, every breath is accounted for. Not out of paranoia, but out of devotion. If life is sacred, then so is how you drink water, how you trim a nail, how you laugh when a banana hits a foot.
The final hours before nightfall stretch long, slow, and golden. You sit under the Bodhi tree behind the monastery, the one with roots like thick fingers clutching the earth, and listen. Not to anything in particular, just listen. Leaves rustle overhead. A dog barks once, then immediately regrets the energy spent. Somewhere, a gong sounds the 6th time today, not that you're counting. Well, you are. You always are, but you pretend not to. Evening duties unfold like muscle memory, lighting lamps in the shrine hall, offering fresh flowers, well, fresher than yesterday's, and refreshing the sand painting near the main altar. A rule you read says the petals must always point eastward towards purity. No one tells you what happens if they point west. Maybe you implode, maybe you just get the look. Tonight's devotion is the Metta Sutta, loving-kindness recitations. You chant softly, lips brushing the verses like wind over reeds. It's strange how you once found this monotonous, and now your whole nervous system waits for it. The hall flickers with lamp glow. Shadows stretch like old monks owing. You kneel. The straw mat digs into your knees, but you don't move. Pain here is not a signal to stop, but a door to awareness. You breathe into it, out, in, out. No drama, no resistance, just the moment, quietly unfolding. A lizard scampers across the wall, briefly pausing to eavesdrop. You envy its certainty. The final bell sounds. You rise, your back creaking like temple stairs, and head to your cell. On the way, you pass the elder monk. He's sweeping again, always sweeping. No leaves remain, but he continues anyway, eyes soft as candle flame. You bow. He nods. Barely. That's enough. Inside your room, you unfold your mat, straighten the mosquito net, and prepare for sleep. But not just yet. There's one last ritual. You sit cross-legged, back upright, and recite the 10 reflections of the reclining mind. It's a 14th century formula. You've memorized it by now, but you still speak it aloud, softly, like a bedtime story to your own soul. Tonight, I rest not to indulge, but to restore. Should I not wake, let my last breath be free from anger. Should I wake, let my first be filled with gentleness. The candle flickers low. Then you do the thing the monks never admit to. You sigh, a big, un-monk-like sigh, the kind you'd get scolded for in a public hall, but here, alone, you allow it. Because tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, and the day after that, and there's comfort in that. An endless circle of strange, sacred rules written in the ink of ancient palms and sweat and repetition. Some scholars still argue whether 14th century Burmese monks actually followed all these rules, or if the texts were more like wish lists. Others think the more bizarre entries, like "do not drink rain that has passed through the beak of a heron," were jokes snuck in by bored scribes. But you've come to a different conclusion. The strangeness is the point. The specificity, the limitations. They whittle you down into something small enough to touch silence. When you live within these walls, you don't need grand gestures to prove devotion. Just remembering not to blow on your soup the wrong way might be enough. Your eyes begin to close. The candle finally gutters out. Outside, the monastery breathes. The world narrows now. Your limbs settle into stillness. Your breath is quiet, almost imperceptible. Even your thoughts begin to slow, like monks returning from alms, barefoot, unhurried, already fading into the mist. Above you, the mosquito net sways gently, not from wind, but from memory. The lizard on the wall has gone. The Bodhi tree rests. And you, little pilgrim of rules and rituals, have nothing more to obey tonight. The candle's scent lingers in the air, smoke and beeswax, like something ancient has exhaled. You feel the stone floor beneath the wooden boards, the press of earth under monastery walls, and deeper still, the warmth of centuries curling beneath your spine. You are not just sleeping, you are joining the hush of 1,000 nights just like this. The rule book is closed. Its ink is dry. Its last line is a whisper. And even that dissolves. You drift downward, not falling, but floating, held by silence. Crickets carry you. Darkness welcomes you.